In previous episodes, we talked about the fragmentation, the challenges. Now let's see what it means in terms of cost and risk for you. There's embedded cost, which relates to the actual transaction that gets paid by you. But there's also hidden costs that impact the overall bottom line of the company. As an example, fraud is significant in terms of costs, risk related to managing, reputational issues related to compliance. So there's multiple factors dependent on which channels you set up, in addition to the infrastructure that you have to create and all the administrative work on the back end. Your costs in managing a global transaction can elevate significantly. Let me give you an example. Let's say on average, discount rate, which is the take rate that a merchant will pay, is at 1.5%. And you were going to translate into basis points the additional or incremental costs. Fraud itself can represent close to 60 to 80 basis points in addition to the take rate. Additional to that, you need an area that manages fraud, risk, and those are costs that you're paying in your finance teams or your operational teams that represent somewhere between 30 to 40 basis points. If you add to that the risk component, the compliance component, all the other areas that support your business in order to ensure that the transactions are not only compliant, but are driven through the channels in an adequate manner, you'll end up basically doubling, if not more, the actual take rate or cost that you're dealing with. If you're in Europe and you actually want to expand your services, you're currently accepting credit cards, but your fraud losses are increasing, you actually want to enable another means of payment. That translates into a lot of administrative work and time. If you want to enable real-time bank transfers, you would have to go and understand the regulatory environment in each country. You would have to set up bank accounts and potentially legal entities in each country. And at least you would have to set up a settlement account or a bank account through which you can collect. Imagine the costs involved of doing that. Let's talk about Africa. You potentially would have the same challenges that you face in multiple regions. Regulatory environment, tax issues, setting up an entity, setting up bank accounts. And then you still have an additional challenge, which is connecting to the telephone companies, getting on their priority list for you to be connected. And obviously you would have to commit to delivering certain volumes. And so it makes it very hard to connect as a merchant into the payment methods that Africa offers. And most of them happen outside of the banking industry anyway. So you would still have to go and connect to multiple parties, which makes it even harder, because after payment channel is integrated, then you have to deal with the administration, the reconciliation, the fund flow, the transfer of the funds, the hedging of the funds. Enabling in multiple markets would mean that you would have to deploy people in those markets if you actually want to have access to those markets. Additionally, you have the risk related to the process. And it could be a legal risk, it could be a tax issue, it could be a compliance issue, dependent on the payment option you're setting up. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to go into Colombia. I'm sure you didn't know that for every deposit that you intake, you have to pay a tax. For every deposit that gets transferred out, you have to pay a tax. If you don't declare it and you don't pay it, you become liable, and the local authorities can sanction you heavily for not reporting the corresponding tax. Finally, I would say from a technology perspective, the more partners you have, the more integrations you support, the more services that you maintain imply more complexity and a higher technological risk. Now you understand the complexity around implementing global payments. In the next episode, I'm going to introduce you to what I believe is the best solution available to set up a global payments infrastructure.